Hello everybody, my name is Magnus, and welcome to our Shining Force 2 tier list. I did this with Shining Force 1, and I plan on doing it for every single Shining Force game that I play, as long as they have the tier lists available for them. I will go through and make those tier lists. To start off, I want to say that all characters are usable, and I think that my last playthrough really showed that. I used every character from the moment that I get them all the way through until they need to be replaced when I team filled out with all the new characters. So you got to see them for how powerful they were from the time that they joined, continuing on. And yeah, you can use every single character. There are no issues with that. The way that I am basing this off of, or what I am basing this off of, is super difficulty with minimal grind, and you know, based on their raw stats, their spells, their overall utility, everything that they bring to the table from the moment that you get them through to the end of the game. Sometimes it's a very long time, sometimes a very short time. So I'm not really taking into account too much on their availability, because it's not their fault that they aren't available for most of the game, but just how useful they are from that point onward, which will be a hindrance to some and an advantage to others, with the fact that like some of them might be extremely useful for majority of the game, and you know, you have to give them some credit for that. But why super difficulty? It is different from normal, especially in the mid to end game when you have that huge boost to the enemy attack. With that major increase in attack, especially for the unarmed or the weaponless enemies, it means that defense will matter more or matter less depending on what character that you're talking about. It definitely changes that aspect. Shining Force isn't really that difficult. Shining Force 2 anyway is definitely not that difficult that you can't play on Super. Even as a new player necessarily, you could probably pick it up and just go, oh, you have some really powerful enemies, and you just choose your powerful units and go through. So that's what I'm going to go through and base it off of, because I like having it on super difficulty, although I do like my normal run-throughs. That's what I'm going to base everything off of, because that means that the better characters will probably shine more. And, you know, this, even though I say that a new character can pick this up, this is not meant for a new player to just look at this list and go, oh, okay, this is how I should play. Now, you go through and explore how you want to play normal difficulty first, see what the game feels like, and then try that super difficulty. Like I said, it's not too hard, so if you really like a challenge, you can get into it, but start off with a normal difficulty if you're just getting into the game. You'll have fun with it. And then minimal grind. And what do I mean by minimal grind? Shining Force allows you to grind either by retreating from different battles, repeating some battles that are repeatable, or by doing the challenge match that just keeps spawning enemies until the end of time that you can just level up your characters off of. And the reason why I don't want to have minimal grinding in there, really, that is, if you die, you just repeat the battle and then continue to move on. That's about as much grinding as I'm really taking into account. If you grind, it really just destroys any difficulty with this. And then when I say any character can be useful, I really mean any character can be useful. Any character can end up being S tier at that point, because they'll all crush. No matter who they are, they will all crush the enemy if you just super grind them and get them to max stats. It is fun to do so. You are able to play the game how you want, but when I'm ranking them in this tier list, it doesn't take grinding into account, because I want to see what their stats are if you just went straight through the game and spent the least amount of time doing the chore that is grinding. And I say it's a chore because it is repetitive. You're repeating battles and you're just trying to gain levels, and you may enjoy that part, and that's fine. But it is a chore that you're doing, so we're eliminating that side of it and taking the characters how they are. And you know, and this is not necessarily all on a speed run basis. You can take your time through the games. You know, if a character is able to clear a map quicker than another one, and everything else is equal, that character is going to end up being better. But if they bring you different styles, then they equalize. You know, if somebody has an extreme amount of defense, is able to survive the battle and still be able to output damage, you know, that kind of puts them on par with somebody who has a lot of damage but isn't able to take that much on their own, because there's advantages and disadvantages there. So don't think that this is just, oh, highest attack and go. It's not necessarily it. There's a lot of factors into it. And finally, this is just my opinion. My last tier list, getting a lot of comments on, and I really do appreciate that. Please tell me what your thoughts are down in the comments on each of these characters, what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong. Tell me who you think is my choice, what crazy choice I made this time. You know, I'm basing this all off of my own experiences, the experiences that I've seen from others playing the game, and the raw stats that I see going through, reading through C. Skocker's game facts research that he has done. He did this for Shining Force 1 and Shining Force 2, at the very least. I don't know if he did it with any other ones, and it's an extensive amount of work, so you should definitely check that out. But I based it all off of those numbers. That way I had, you know, some objectivity to the way that I'm looking at each of these characters. Without further ado, we're going to go and start off here. And for the record, I have heard the comments from before in trying to speed things up, and I actually have my own notes now that I'm going to be basing everything off of, instead of just a generality or trying to figure it out at the moment. So hopefully that seems better. Let me know down in the comments below if you like that style better or not. We're going to start off with Bowie, so I'm just going to go in order that you get the characters, and some of it can be a little bit iffy as you go through, but generally this is the order that you get the characters. So we're going to start off with Bowie. He is the hero, and he's a good hero. I will just say that right out. He gains a lot of attack, and has a decent amount of survivability for the majority of the game. There are some iffy points, especially in the beginning, where his defense really doesn't hold up, and he doesn't have enough HP to make up for that. However, he will get up in the defense, he will go up in his HP enough, and then he is able to pick up spells, unlike Max in Shining Force 1. He's able to cast Bolt, as well as his Egress, and Bolt is a phenomenal spell for him. It's extremely useful, all area of effect, up until Bolt level 4, which you're probably not getting with him by the end game. Especially looking at my straight playthrough, where I didn't really focus on him, but I gave him the same amount of care as I did any other character. And he was able to get, I think, either Bolt 2, at least up to Bolt 2, maybe up to Bolt 3, and that was very useful in the battles that they were there. So, great one spell to give him, besides Egress. And he's the only one that can use the Force Sword, which makes him an absolute monster, and his attack was already really good. So a solid character throughout most of the game. He struggles just a little bit in the early mid-game, with some sword weapon upgrades are always a problem with Shining Force for whatever reason. But he's able to grow out of that pretty well, and he's your Lord, so you might as well use him to make sure that he's able to survive, because if you lose him, you're gonna have to restart that battle. And he's a good character anyway, so you might as well. So I put him over in the A. The things that's really holding him back is his early mid-game. He can struggle there. So that's where I'm going to leave him. He's not the top tier, but he's pretty darn close. He's a good hero. Next up, we have Sarah. Sarah is your first healer that you get right off the bat, and despite some utility with attacking for the first couple of battles, she starts really falling off in the attack, but she's a healer. So you want her to heal. If you don't get her kill experience in the beginning, you're gonna have a hard time leveling her up, because healing doesn't give a ton of experience, especially since she doesn't get the good spells that would allow her to do so, such as getting something like Aura or Boost or anything like that. Her spell selection can be a little weak when it comes to that side. She does get slow, which is very useful, and blast. So she gets detox, heal, slow, and blast. Slow is extremely useful for debuffing enemies, but it takes a bit to get there. Blast at least gives you some guaranteed damage for her, which is decent. But the real thing that makes her great is the fact that she can become a Master Monk. Anybody that can become a Master Monk can be great. And it's because they get a lot of combat utility and a bunch of attack boost from the gloves. And then she can become a powerhouse. Out of all of the Master Monk types, she's probably the second strongest, just because you get her early on in the game and are able to level her up pre-promotion. Yes, to get her to most powerful, you would have to grind. Since I'm not taking to that account, even if she got up to the promotion and promoted, she's still going to be probably a little bit better in the attack category than one of the other Master Monks, but definitely behind one of the others, and she's not as easily grindable. But so powerful and so useful to have that healing, to be able to keep your best guys up, especially early on, that I bring her over to an A. If you don't make her a Master Monk, it definitely drops her down, because the Viker, you lose that attack capability. And that really shuts down what Sarah would be good at. And she actually gains a decent amount of attack at that point in time. So, that's where I'm putting her. Chester. Centaurs, you have more of the same as Shining Force 1. Great movement, and it's not as penalized here in Shining Force 2. I will say that. Movement for non-flyers is not as penalized. There are a lot of maps that still take a lot of terrain into account, but they usually give some sort of path, or there's a lot more battles where it doesn't matter, or where there is at least a path for these Centaurs to actually use their 7th movement. His attack starts off decent, and then slows a bit down. However, you can snowball with his attack fairly early on, since he has the ranged capability. Lances and spears generally get boosts a lot more often than swords, and so he can be pretty useful. But once you start getting into the mid-game, if you haven't snowballed with him and made him like one of your top priorities, he's going to fall way behind everybody else. And the movement and the range won't matter when he's doing less damage than everybody, like way less damage than everybody else. Yeah, and the thing is, especially with how early you get him on, you want to promote him to a paladin, because Pegasus Knight, it just takes so long for you to get to, and without grinding to be able to get either match the levels after you promote him, it's either going to be really tough to carry along with you, as it's going to carry weak weapons into the point where you get Pegasus Knight, or you're going to hold him back in your caravan, and then you're going to promote him, and then he's going to still be way behind everybody else. So without being able to do that easily, which I really wish that the game would have brought the wing much earlier to allow you to promote right when you're doing like you were doing with Kaizen or with Sarah. I'm gonna have to give it him a C though. He doesn't have the defenses to do extremely well. The movement is great, but when you don't have the attack to match it, or even the defense to match it, it really just kind of falls to the wayside. And this is going to be a familiar position for a lot of Centaurs, as we've seen before. And it's unfortunate, because I love the Centaurs. Chester is actually one of my favorite characters in this to keep in my team, because you get him right off the bat, and I like keeping characters all the way through if I can. As long as they're useful, and unfortunately, he's the one that I usually will drop at some point, because I can't get him to get to that point where he's worth it. Then we have Jaha. So Jaha has a kind of a dichotomy. When he starts off, he's very useful, a bit slow moving, and he is able to use axes has a good attack, has good defense, a little bit low on the HP, but is able to make up for it. Then you get to the mid-game, before his promotion, he starts really slowing down in comparison to the other characters that you're getting, because you're getting higher movement characters, or characters with fly that have the same amount of attack, or have more attack than him. And he's just like, hey, I'm a tanky guy, but I just can't get to the battlefield. And that all gets fixed once he gets promoted. The Baron class is phenomenal. It really fixes his issues by giving him an extra movement, and one movement does matter in this case. Gives him the options of swords, which means that he has the ability to upgrade his weapons more often to keep up with the power curve. He does lose out a bit of defense in comparison to the gladiator role. I think it is gladiator. I have to double check on it. But in either case, it's about 10 defense in the end. And to be honest, for him, that's nothing. Jaha can snowball out of control as a Baron, and that's phenomenal. Especially if you give him a rune axe to move further. Then he has 7 movement, and he's kind of matching Slade and the Centaurs on this movement, and he's still tankier and has more attack generally than they do. So he has a little bit of problems in the middle, but really he is an effective character all the way through, and I'm going to put him in the A's up with his buddies up here. Definitely a worthwhile character, especially newbie friendly. If you can get the Warrior's Pride, if you find out where it is, get it, promote him. You can promote him at level 20, and he'll still be a great character to have. If you saw him on my playthrough, he was matching the attack, or just a little bit behind, just by the fact that he was, 10 levels behind some characters in attack, and his defense was still good. So I could have picked him up there and still would have been fine. So he's a good character when I can do that. Then we have Kaizen. Blazing Kaizen, the early blaze that you get with him, and the fact that he gets to blaze 4 fairly quickly, is very useful. His other spells are very situational. You have to kind of get lucky with them, and overall that just makes him less useful than other mages. Reminder, mages also have 5 movement, so it's hard to get him to where he needs to go, and with Blaze only having a 2 of range, never getting that 3 range, it's quite difficult after the first bit of Blaze utility that you have. Luckily, he's very useful all the way up to getting him to level 20, and around where the Elven village is, there's importance with that. You can get him to be a sorcerer, and although the range problem almost never goes away, with the exception of Atlas 2, the damage gets a lot better than with what he can do with Blaze by being a sorcerer. And I think he's the best one to make a sorcerer over the other option that you have, even though he is technically the weakest sorcerer in the sense of how quickly he, at what level he would gain the spells. He's definitely better than one of the other ones that you get. But I say that out of the choice of making one or the other character a sorcerer, Tyron here, you make Kaizen the sorcerer. And I think he needs it the most. And even if you don't do that, Blaze 4 is always useful, very cost effective, and you'll be able to spam it out. So he'll be able to do decent amount of damage, it's just not as much as you want. But in general, I think most people go through and make him a sorcerer, and if you do that, gets a solid B. He's a solid character in this case, looking at it. He just has some minor problems that keeps him from being a strong character. Next up, we have Slade. Slade, his problem is really, it's 2 things. One, he has a problem with his attack in the very beginning, because he has knives, and he hasn't really snowballed out of control. And his defense is really lacking. He will always be a glass cannon. He should be able to survive attacks and not get one-shot necessarily through most of the game, but you really can't put him into range of like 2 or 3 enemies or more. His defense won't hold up, especially in Super. Maybe a little bit different story in the lower difficulties, but it's still a major problem there. Luckily, his attack is made up in a few levels. It does not take him that much. So when I talk about having problems, it's usually not because they have a problem for a couple of levels. It's for maybe 10 levels that they would have an issue. Slade, he really catches up in a few levels. So his attack is not that much of an issue, especially since his attack will get super boosted later on, and he'll be one of your highest damage dealers. That with 7 movement makes him a great glass cannon. He gets some spells that are really useful, that are blazes and bolts equivalents anyway. And yeah, he's just very useful. It just takes him just a tiny bit to get there, to be quite honest. It just takes a power water. You can give a power water to any character, and they get a bit better, but I think the best use is with Slade, initially, if you're not just doing a speedrun and trying to peter it out. You give Slade a power water, and now he's doing the same amount of damage everybody else is doing, and he would have caught up to that at some, within the next 5 levels. But this just gets him there immediately, makes him useful as a character with 7 movement, and gets him his levels to keep up with the rest of the team, and then far exceed them later on. So I rank him an A. He's always a great character. The Ninja Rat is phenomenal, and it's sad that I couldn't play with him the entire game. And he was very useful for my playthrough, and I didn't baby him. I gave him a power water, like I said, and I didn't even scum the amount of attack that he would gain from it. I just took it as is, and he was great through that game. Kiwi. I love Kiwi to death. I really do. But one, you saw my playthrough. He was really struggling. There's a lot that was on my fault, because I ended up just saying, when he got a little bit behind, and I allowed him to get a little bit behind, I just went, you know what? I'm not going to keep him. So I don't care what happens to him. That's a little bit of my fault, but that's not every playthrough that I have with him. He's a fun character to have around if you can get him to promotion on time with everybody else. He kind of fixes some of his attack issues that he has to begin with. And when I mean to begin with, I mean like all of pre-promotion. He pretty much has a problem with attack. But he picks up being able to float. His defense is always really good, with the exception of when you're in Super. The plus 25% attack for the unarmored or the unarmed enemies really catches up. And so his defense kind of keeps up with them, but he still takes a lot of damage. With low HP, the entire time that you have him, it really hurts. So now you have to worry about those guys, you have to worry about magic, and then you're like, okay, well, what is he good against? When he's promoted, he also gets Flame Breath, which can be kind of useful depending on the enemy that you're fighting, and then also it can just do less damage than he would have done anyway, if you use the Power Ring on him for chance. This is the first character where it's very useful to use the Power Ring on them, just because he gets the most attack from it, since it's a scaled to their base attack. You can have some utility with that. I'm going to rank him a C because there is some utility with that, and he gets hover. And he can be very useful, it's just very iffy. And if you end up like me and he gets a little bit behind, there's no catching up with him most of the time. So we're going to give him a solid C, and he's fine. As a newer player and playing in normal, his rank would definitely change because that 25% attack isn't there. And his defense will almost always be useful, except against magic users and breath users. And I think that at least puts him up to a B in a normal. Just in Super, he kind of gets knocked down a peg. May. You're only a good archer. Centaur movement. You can see, if you compared all of my characters who had similar levels, May had a great leap of attack over all of the other archers, and that's extremely useful with somebody that can maneuver around. She still has low defense, though, of the archers. In fact, probably a little bit lower than some of them. And that really does hurt her, in that sense that she can't survive. But if you are able to put her into a position, which her movement should allow her to do that, put her into a position that protects her, that you're still able to hit the enemy, she's great. And that's why I go through and put her as a B. This is the only archer that I really want to take, although I do enjoy playing with my archers. She can be at all the way through the end game and be perfectly fine, keeps up with the attack. It's just the defense that really is holding her back from being in these top characters, despite the fact that I really like using her. She's one of the funnest ones for me to use. And you could tell that through my playthrough. I was very sad when she had to go away. Peter. You've seen him, you love him, he's an S-tier character. He really has almost no competition. There's one character that is on the same level, but he is still well ahead. His attack is phenomenal. His defense, I can't even say that it's low at any point. It's just, it's not extremely high for a bit, and then, especially if he snowballs, because he kills everything that's in sight, he'll be perfectly fine with that, and his HP. His stats are almost never low. He's got the best movement. There's nothing it can't get better than Peter, in all actuality. Yeah, that's pretty much it. The only downside on his end is he doesn't have any spells. That's it. That's it. He will wreck things, and there's a reason why speedrunners focus on using Peter. Alright, moving on to Gerhald. The great thing with Gerhald is he has a lot of attack, and he's unarmed, so he has all of that attack, which can be further boosted by the power ring, and he basically has about the same amount of attack as Peter on average, if you level him up the same. So that makes him really good in that sense, but he lacks the movement type, the movement in itself. His defense can be a little bit low, and same thing with his HP. In comparison to what you want for that frontline fighter, but because you can boost him up so much, and the fact that even though it can be a little bit low, it doesn't mean he gets one shot, so he can survive some. I'm going to put him in A because he has that utility there. I will say he is not extremely friendly for newer players, because you can get him in just a little bit of trouble and he just can't move as far as you'd want him to go. But he can be on the same power level here. He's probably in the lower end, and you could argue going down to a B, but with the way that I see him and use him, getting the power ring and everything, the fact that he can get through the tough defenses of a lot of enemies and kill them, that has all the uses that you need from him. I just wish that he had more movement. I wish he had Xylo movement, but he doesn't. Luke. Alright, so he's a Birdman, but Birdmen are slower than in Shining Force 1, so he's got 6 movement instead of 7. The flying is great, but his attack is pretty low, and since the power ring does not use the same formula, or the attack spell does not use the same formula as Shining Force 1, he really suffers in this. He's still a useful character, and the fact that he can fly around is good, and the fact that his attack is okay can be useful. I'm going to throw him, he's really at the low end of the B, you could argue a C on that end, but I think his mobility and the fact that he can kind of survive really keeps him out of that C category. Note that anybody that flies instead of hovers doesn't gain the terrain effects, and that means that you are going to suffer a lot with these higher damage enemies, because you won't get the terrain bonuses. Birdmen are really hurt with that, especially Luke, but he was able to survive a lot of things for me, and that led me to believe here that, alright, I can use him as long as it's not going against too much. And that can be said for all three of these characters right here. So, that's telling you something. He at least has the utility of being a very mobile character, and that has enough of an attack to make a difference. Alright, now we have Rick. Yeah, Sea Chester. He has a little bit less attack, more defense. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to say much more. They're almost the same type of character. There's a little bit of differences, but it's not enough for it to really matter. And they kind of fall to the wayside. Now, if we want to, like, a comparison here, Luke has usually, what I've seen, is almost the same attack as these two Centaurs. One less movement, but has flying. You know, he doesn't have the ranged option of these two, but the ranged option is usually not that good for them. So that's why he's here and they're there. Like I said, he could be argued down to a C to be kind of on their level. Next we go against Elric. He's an archer, and archers have bad attack. The two that you get, they do have bad attack, and they don't get that much better. If you turn him into a brass gunner, he then has okay defense, but he's even slower. So archers are moving at 5, and then you make him a brass gunner. Now he's moving at 4. They can get through some terrain, but it's generally not worthwhile there. He's useful, but he has a super lack of attack power. And the real only... this is why I put him in at D. The real only saving factor for him not getting an F is that the 3 range that he gets is pretty useful if you do any damage at all. So usually against mages and things like that that aren't in terrain necessarily, he can at least do some damage too, I guess. But yeah, you saw I was struggling with my archers. Next we have Creed's 4. I'm going to just start off with Karna. She's the other one that keeps up in the tier here. She comes with one of the best spell lists that you can get with being a healer. Getting aura, getting boost are like the main 2 factors for her. That, and then she could become a master monk. And the fact that she can continuously use boost and aura to grind herself without grinding. You don't have to take that much longer in battles for her to gain a huge amount of experience and to keep up, and that doesn't degrade with the enemies that you're facing because you just keep using boost and it gives you a set amount of experience. And she can become super out of control and really just wreck things. So if you are really grindy with stuff, even if you're not trying to repeat battles or anything, she can get to extremely high levels and really match up with Peter in some sense, but she does have 5 movements still as a Master Monk, and no flying, and you do have to spend some extra time and finish battles a little bit slower, but yeah, for her to get onto Peter's level or to exceed it if you get to that point. But with it, even if you don't do that, she's still a great character. So definitely take Karna if you can. Eric, he is the best Centaur that you get, and that's why I'm going to put him over into a B. I'm going to put him ahead of Luke. I'm not ranking them within here. I'm just going to put them in the categories. But being the best Centaur is not really saying much. What he really has is he has more attack and defense, and that's very useful. It makes him a usable character and a strong character, but he still has the penalties of these other two, and it's not such a great difference that he's the massive attacking powerhouse of these 3. Or Bowie there, in general. He's just not getting there. And so that's kind of unfortunate. I wish that that we got the Pegasus Knight again earlier on, but if he could be a Pegasus Knight, then I probably would rank him higher if you were able to get that just a little bit sooner, to be quite honest. Just a little bit sooner so he's not behind in promoting, is the big thing. Now we go over to Randolph. supposedly he's better than Jaha, but Jaha has had the entire game up to that point to level up and everything, and he could have possibly already promoted by the time that you're getting here and have had a few levels. That doesn't mean that Randolph's going to be bad, but you already have somebody that's probably equivalent to power, and I just lost that, so we will be right back. Alrighty, and we're back. Yep, yes, things crashing, it's fine. Anyways, Randolph, I put as a B, just because he can be useful when you get him, and is a solid character, but you already have a character that's able to do the same thing that you've had the entire time. It is likely that if you spent a good time with him, is ahead of where Randolph is, even if you promoted him right there. Now, he does have more room to grow, but generally, like, hitting the point where you're not getting any more experience, if you're just playing straight through, doesn't happen up until way later anyway. And so, Randolph would only be getting a few points ahead at that point in time, rather than being more powerful when you get him. And that's where the argument comes in. Now, if you're not using Jaha, Randolph could be a good pickup, but, I mean, you compare him to the other characters that you get, and I just don't see it. Now, I personally haven't used Randolph. This is looking at the stats that you get from him. And so there's some bias that comes in with that, so let me know if you have any different opinions if you use Randolph. Comparing him to Jaha, I want you to go through and compare that and say, hey, what is the difference between them? What have you felt with it? Just looking at his raw stats, though, most of the time whenever I have Jaha, like, Jaha's winning out at that point in time, and you might as well just keep using him. Alright, Tyron. He is the best mage that you get out of all the mages that you have, which you don't get an extreme amount. His wizard spells are fantastic. They completely obliterate the competition because because he is basically your bolt mage, but he does learn the freezes as needed. He just has the best damaging spell selection, and he has the most stats, or the better stats out of all the mages, and will end up surpassing Kaizen in those two. Now, he does learn the sorcerer spell list faster than Kaizen would, meaning that technically he would then be the best sorcerer because he learns them the fastest, gets the best ones as soon as possible, and has great MP. However, I would still probably, if I brought both of them, have Kaizen as a sorcerer, because Tyron, he's wonderful as a wizard anyway. But that is up to your choice. He's good either way. And because of that, I get him over to A, because he gets those 3 ranged spells, or the fact that he's just the best sorcerer that's there, and sorcerers are really powerful. No matter what, he's going to be doing lots of damage the way that you want him, and he's good. Janet. Janet is somehow worse than Elric. And in this case, it's unlike Hans and Diane, where really the difference is negligible between these two. For some reason, I found that she was actually a lot weaker than Elric. Well behind him. And that shouldn't have happened. I think that was a little bit of a stat fluke on my end for her, but it's still pretty bad, but equivalent to Elric. I'm not going to say much more there. Road, his stats aren't too bad for a brass gunner. He has the defense that's there. He's already promoted, but to be quite honest, he's equivalent to the other archers, at least, if not a little bit better than them. But again, he is a brass gunner with 4 movement, and yeah, he still matches up with them. He wasn't even, like, he was doing damage and doing work for me in my playthrough, but that's just because I didn't have other people that would have replaced. I didn't have all these other guys, right? I only had a select few of them. That was just based off of time, and so when you don't have a lot of the better guys to compare him to that I would have normally replaced him with, yeah, he looks fine. And you have these bottom-of-the-barrel units with you. So that's what that's really saying. So that's where he fits in. Next up, we have Higgins. So at first, as I've played before, I always look at him and go, oh, man, he's just bad. And like, looking at it in that perspective, yes, he is. He is a pretty bad paladin. However, there's two factors that actually make him decent. One, with this last playthrough, because I was forced to use them, it showed that he at least has some attack power. His staying power his defense is pretty low, but he at least has some attack power and is able to do something. And at that point in time in the game, there is a lot less terrain that is completely slowing it down, and so 7 movement actually is a lot more powerful here than the other maps where you had deserts or tons of forest or anything else like that. So, you know, he's a lot better at that point. But here's the kicker. You get him, you use him for a few battles, and then he's able to get the mithril weapons. So you are able to have a promoted lance user that you didn't have to put effort into to getting up to promotion. And if you just barely got these guys up to promotion, promoted them, and left them for a while, he'd still be better than those two. Alright? And what's important about those mithril weapons is that you get the Valkyrie. So you're able to boost the attacks of others, so your utility just went up. And missed javelins are also fantastic, so even with his low attack power, he would be able to do damage. So he's able to stay in the C category because of that. I'm not going to say that he's better than these two necessarily, because if you got him up to promotion, if you kept him on your team, got him up to promotion, promoted them, and leveled them up to the equivalent level of a Higgins to that point in time, which you probably are at least that level, if not maybe a little bit more, just depends, they would be better. So, but at least with him you didn't have to invest in, and you can get that great utility out of him. Next up, you have Thea. Thea is extremely frail. She is a sorcerer and can be great with that, but unfortunately she starts off with Deo, and she dies in one hit. On Super, she will almost always die in one hit no matter what, so you have to be extremely careful. I couldn't keep Thea alive to save my life. I put her into a C just because the sorcerers are so powerful with their magic, but everything else just tank her. Be very cautious on Super with her. On Normal, she's probably surviving all of those attacks, is able to survive one. And that's it. Her defense is still extremely low. So take care. That those sorcery spells are just so good, though. So if you need a third or a second one, can't say a third because there's not a way to get the third in that group. If you need a second sorcerer or want one, you can use her. It'll be okay as long as you defend her. Screech. He's got the worst part of being a birdman. You know, he doesn't have a lot of attack. In fact, is extremely reduced in comparison to how Luke's would be. You are effectively hitting enemies with a pool noodle when you're hitting with Screech. Even with me boosting him up, he was barely doing any damage with the best weapons that we had. And that's just not excusable. Every other, like, if you see how I used him in the game, you can see that, hey, I was having some utility with a protect ring, and I was able to do some sort of damage and get the dark sword somewhere. That's just because I had nobody else to use. Almost any other character would have been more useful with those things than him, besides the fact that he could fly and use the protect ring. But by that point in time, I had boosts on another character, or I would have had it with somebody else. Like, he just sucks. And I'm going to put him in the F because his stats are just so low that I could barely find it. Like, I had to work hard to find something useful for him, and he just died most of the time anyway. You may just give him some rings and have him use the stuff, but you might as well give that to a Centaur and do the exact same thing, or, you know, the other bird battler, or anybody else that has more than 5 movement. And you pretty much have what he's able to do. Jarror, on the other hand, at least had some attack power, and that's because he doesn't carry the swords, he in fact carries the spears, and even with the Valkyrie, but he had the missed javelin, he's able to carry that. He is able to do more damage. He has that greater utility because he has the further movement than the Bird Battler. And you combine that with the Valkyrie, and you saw exactly what happened. I was able to fly around, boost people up, and then, or boost him up with some other characters, and just knock things from afar because he has that ranged attack with a better weapon. And really, you can see that in the speedruns too. They actually use Jarror because Pegasus Knights are good if you can get them at that point in time. With him, you at least don't have to wait or have some opportunity cost because you just recruit him as is. And I actually throw him up to a B because of that. He has great utility. Not saying he's going to be one of your strongest attackers, and he is a little bit fragile, but he wasn't dying in one hit most of the time. He was taking, 2 hits to die at least, and he was able to do damage from afar, trapping some enemies, and really had a lot of utility for me. And so now, I think before I would have maybe put him into a C or a D. I definitely think he's a solid character now. Frasier. He is pretty bad as a healer. If you used anybody else to heal, he does not outshine them at all. He does learn some pretty good spells. He does get attack, just way late. I didn't get it until near the end of the game with him. He takes a level to learn Aura, and they should have just given it to him right off the bat because it was so slow to even get him the 1 level on there. And that's really showing because I had to use him, and he was my healer that I was really going to be able to use. It really showed that he wasn't really that useful. I put him to a C because he does have some utility, especially with a Wish Staff. That gives him the attack spell before he has the attack spell. It's just costly to repair, but you usually don't have to worry about it too much. So he has a little bit of utility, but that's about it. He's not to the egregious levels of uselessness, but he's pretty low in there. Most characters aren't down at this point. Most characters should probably solidly land in this category here. Or these two here. Next up, we have Gaian. And you know what? He is a solid character. I'm going to throw him right into a B because I was able to pick him up, and even with the egregiousness of the heat axes that I got, instead of any actual useful weapon, he did enough damage for it to matter. He had a great enough defense that when you boosted him up, it pretty much mitigated the extra attack that the enemy got. He was one of my tanks that I was able to rely on, and there's only a few other characters that would have been able to do that if I even kept them through the game. So he's definitely a useful character. He's just a bit slow because he's not a Baron. But you don't have to invest into him. He's just a free character that you get that has a lot of defense and enough of attack for it to matter, meaning that if you actually gave him a good weapon, he'd be great. Maybe not one of your better characters. Randolph would be able to outstrip him pretty easily, but you have to invest into him. You don't have to invest into Gaian. He just comes in and is useful from that point on. And so that's why I rank him into here. Then you have Sheila, the 3rd Master Monk, and Master Monks get put up in the top 2 tiers, but I keep her in the A tier. This is because even though she gets boost, it takes her a while to really get up to boost 2, which is the most useful one. That's the one that you really want to gain a bunch of experience and everything. Boost 1 gives you some and is useful, but you saw when I lost Karna, who had boost level 2, it took a while for Sheila to really catch up and fit in that role. And she was okay. She doesn't snowball out of control like these two. It takes a while for Sarah to be able to do something like that. Karna's able to just do that inherently. Sheila, she can gain the experience that she needs to and be useful there, but her defense is actually a little bit low, and her attack doesn't get that high unless you grind a ton out of her with the spell using that we talked about with these, with Karna at least. So you know, that can fluctuate, but especially in comparison to these two, more than likely she's weaker than these two, just because she's already promoted. You couldn't level her up pre-promotion, and just that's how the stats generally fall. If they're already promoted and you get them later in the game, they usually are worse than the characters that you've had with you that you can promote. But still solid. It's definitely still solid. Master Monks are awesome. Then we have Zinc. Zinc is one of my favorite characters. Probably my favorite character of Shining Force 2, just because he's really cool. Robot that you get. He has a chest laser that we never got to see that for a crit. But he's a pretty solid guy. He's semi-tanky, with a good amount of defense and a good amount of HP, so if you boost him, he's going to be pretty alright tanking the front lines. Not as much as Gaian or as Claude here, but definitely usable. He's got a solid attack when you get him. So you can boost that with a power ring, since he's unarmed, and that will greatly increase his attack, and I was really depending on that between him and Claude to be able to take down bosses in the 8 games, since I didn't really have any other major attackers besides Bowie, and you know, if you go against the Red Baron, you're not going to have a good time if you have Bowie around. You've seen my playthrough. But he is slow. Oh my god, 4 movement is so slow. We talked about that with these guys. Oh man, you can give him a movement ring, whatever it's called. You can give him the turbo pepper. It doesn't matter, because you can give that to anybody else and make their movements better. You can have a 7 movement mage. You could have a 9 movement Peter. You know. So, like, what's going to be better, a 6 movement Zinc or a 9 movement Peter? It's going to be Peter. But, despite that, if you're having a hard time doing damage, he's a good guy to have around. He is boostable in there, and he's a solid character that you can just pick up without investment, and you'd be able to get through the end game with him. He's useful enough for that, and that's why I'm going to keep him over into the B. I think he has more use than what a lot of these guys will bring. At least you don't have to suffer through the portions that make these guys a bit more difficult. Like, Kiwi would end up being more powerful than Zinc if you kept him all the way through. But it's painful to keep Kiwi all the way through to where you get to Zinc. And there's a lot of investment there, where you could have used that investment on a better character and just brought Zinc along to do effectively the same stuff, although again he doesn't have the movement that you want there. That'd be a key difference into it, but I still rank him as a solid B, especially looking at this last playthrough that is I wouldn't say open my eyes, because I like Zinc anyway, but you know, it is what it is. Claude, much of the same thing, except for he has lower HP and higher defense, which matters in the fact of the attack of the enemies in Super is extremely high, and he's really your main tank. However, his HP is low, and he's easily killed by the freeze 4s that can be thrown out, or the breath weapons that can be thrown out, so you have to be very careful with that. But if I'm going to keep him over in the B category, these two are probably in the lower end of the Bs, so hanging right with Luke, really. Where they could be argued between here, but I like them where they are here. Next we have Chaz. I'm going to say that magic is always useful, and he has freeze. He's your freeze mage, and has bolt, and those are great, except for he doesn't have the levels that you need at the point in time. You only have like 3 battles if you call one of them. If you call that entire event at the end a single battle. And you have Freeze 3. And you don't pick up Freeze 4 for a bit. Yeah, that's not useful. That's really not. I was having a hard time figuring out how to get him to where he needed to be, and when he was able to get there, it was for middling damage. And so you just get that magic way too late for it to be extremely useful. He probably does at least as much damage as what Screech can do. And he has the possibility of getting up to a freeze 4 and things, so he has better potential. So that's why he's ahead. That's pretty much it. I'm just keeping the one character here at the F. And she'd be like, oh, well, what about Lemon? Yeah, there's no way that he falls into that F category. We're going to go over to Lemon now. You get him pretty late. You know, you're looking at the Chaz timeline with him. But, you know, if you equip the Dark Sword with him, he has 99 attack, I think, or it goes into the question marks, one of the two. And with any other, like, great weapon, he's almost there. And he has good defense, and he has Baron movement. He's a Baron without the investment. Now, if you had Jaha as a Baron, or Randolph as a Baron, they're going to outstrip Lemon. If they're given the good care all the way through. However, Lemon requires no investment, and he's another Baron. And he actually has phenomenal stats. He is not as powerful as, like, when you fought him as the Red Baron, but he is still powerful. And I put him as an A for that, because I've been able to throw him in almost any team that I had, because there was somebody, he can almost always fit within your top 12, no matter what. Unless you grinded every character pre-promotion to level 40, and then promoted them, and then continued on the game. Like, you did full stop and did that. Like, he can outstrip a lot of characters that you do kind of grind if you repeated if you repeated a battle here and there. And that's insane. With the fact that he can have rune axes and swords, and he's just a great character to have at the end. He's able to tank the super difficulty enemies. I was able to use him just for that with a heat axe, and he provided a ton of use for me as that bait. It was phenomenal. I really wish that I was able to show you what his attack would have been like going through. He was really going to be my savior, and then he kind of fell apart because of a glitch. But that's where he solidly falls here. So take a look at this. I know there's disagreements. Just like in the Shining Force 1 tier list, I know there's disagreements. So tell me in the comments below what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, what your favorite characters are. You know, you can claim that, you know, Kiwi's your favorite character, and he becomes, you know, a fire-breathing Godzilla, so he's S tier. You know, you can do that all that you want. Just go down in the comments, go for it. I really enjoy some of the back and forth and like getting your perspective on different things. And hopefully you understood why I chose the things that I chose here. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of an update. I have now finished my Shining Force 2 series, and I'm going to be going with Shining Force CD next. But before that, I owe a special to you all, because during the series, I hit over 100 subscribers, which I didn't think that I'd be able to hit. And I was working on another video to celebrate that, but I don't have enough information. I don't have enough experience with the whole Shining Force series, because Shining Force 1 and 2 are the ones that I actually played. Everything else I might have seen people play, but I've never played it myself. And in other games, I haven't seen it played ever. And so, I'm going to do those first before I get to that, and that'll be another special. But I will have a subscriber special that will talk a little bit about what we mentioned here today. Just so we can get to that mindset there. I think that people like, at least, whether it's on because of the controversy that it creates, or they just like to hear my opinions on things. I think people like to see my mindset and how I think about different characters, and I want to explain that a little bit more as that subscriber special to celebrate it and create more controversy for Shining Force 1, and really double down on everything that I'm going in with. Or maybe change my mind, who knows, but we'll see on that one. Hope you guys will enjoy that, but we are looking for Shining Force CD the next time through. So be on the lookout for that. It will be a blind playthrough, or a mostly blind playthrough. Really, I'm going to be checking things to make sure I'm not missing any hidden items, because I hate the feeling of doing that. I don't think that I'm going to miss anything, because I'm a fan of RPGs, and I know to look everywhere, but I also don't know how it works, so it's going to be a fun game for me to go through and play, and I hope that you enjoy that series as we play through. In any case, thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye!